Hello, class. My name is Miss Darby. Welcome to the first lecture on the undergraduate course on the history of World War I. Now, in this course, we will be going through a deep perspective on what occurred in this war between the years of 1914 and 1918. This course will also include the historical events that either resulted in or was a manifestation of World War I. And today we will be talking about the underlining causes of World War I. Now, the World War I, or the Great War as it was called at the time, was one of the deadliest wars that had occurred in the history of mankind. This would, of course, be surpassed by the casualty rates and the brutalities that took forth in World War II. Now, the Great War was unique because it involved so many nations and countries at the time. It was also unique because it was one of the first wars to have modern technology and tactics, as well as one of the first wars in which homes and unarmed civilians were the intended targets of warfare and aerial bombardment. So, how then did this deadly war start? Or what were the causes of this bloody war? Well, World War I was a result of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife in June of 1914. We will be discussing that in further detail in the lectures next week. Now, the assassinations took place, which would result in the chain of events that would lead to World War I. However, there were a lot of circumstances or underlining causes that had manifested and were festering long before the assassination had been considered or carried out. And so today we will be discussing a few of these underlining causes. Now, to understand the causes of the war, we need to first understand what was occurring right before World War I, which means going back to the early 1900s. Now, for many countries, the 1900s represented the peak of their land. Birth rates were at an all-time high. Death rates were decreasing, especially in birth mortality rates. And in more ways than one, many empires were at their peak with their wealth and with modern technology. This would in turn result in nationalism. Now, nationalism is exalting one's nation above all others, and therefore placing a primary emphasis on its promotion of its cultures and interests as opposed to those of other nations or groups. So basically, it is an ideology that one's group is somehow better than all the others. One could consider it a form of pride in which people would believe that their country was in some shape or form superior to all the others. Now, this ideology started mainly in the 18th and 19th centuries, but by the 20th century it was at its peak. And this is very important because by the early 1900s, many countries had this strong sense of nationalism, especially in the powerful European countries. This strong sense of pride would eventually make people question which country is actually the superior one and exactly how a test would be conducted to prove once and for all which country was the best in the world. Another underlining cause of World War I was imperialism. For those of you who may or may not know, imperialism was the policy, practice, or advocacy of extending the power and dominion of a nation, especially by direct territorial acquisitions or by gaining indirect control over the political or economic life of other areas. Basically, it is in ideology that a person's group, country, or the person themselves would become wealthier and powerful through the conquest of other lands, resources, and peoples. This was how many countries were able to establish themselves and gain in power. Now, the concept of ideology had been around for many centuries. For example, the Spanish Empire was established in the 15th and 16th centuries through the conquest and stealing or looting of silver and pearls in the Americas. It would continue on and increase by the 19th century and would be at its peak by the early 20th century. So as a result, many countries would become either powerful empires or just larger forms of power. This would include lands such as Britain, Germany, and in some cases America. The mindset of imperialism would lead to the forced colonization of native lands, which in turn would make these countries wealthy and bigger. And as a result of this, by the time that the war was conducted, this strong sense of conquest and taking what they believed was theirs would become a strong motivator for rulers and their generals. And so, as a result of these two ideals and more, many people felt as if their country was superior, in some shape or form superior to all the others. However, there was no simple way that they could determine this. And so, as many as people believed at the time, they believed that the only way to truly figure out which country was superior was through war. And not just any war, but an all-out European war. Now, this was unique because of how long it has been since many of these countries had even been in a war, especially one on an enormous scale. For example, it has been centuries in which a war was conducted involving multiple countries at once, meaning such as the 7 Years' War. And it had also been many years since a recent war was conducted at all for certain countries. For example, in Germany, the last war that they had was the Franco-Prussian War. This war occurred in the 1870s, and it only lasted for about a year. And so, as a result, many of the majority of the people had not experienced the true brutalities of war. Many of those that did so had already written or romanticized their stories, and the majority of them were long deceased. And so, as a result, a majority of the people by the 1900s had not experienced a real war. Nevertheless, They believed that it was inevitable that an all-out European war would take place. For them, it was not an if, it was a when. And for them, only then would they be able to determine which country was the best of them all. And so there are many more causes that resulted in this war, many of which you will either learn about through your readings for this week, or you will figure out or discover and explore through your discussion posts. Either way, it will be up to you to learn about what factors were involved in the creation of this all-out European war. Thank you.